Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast as you're driving along in your car or your truck, or put in those earbuds and take it all in while you're on public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about Balkanisation, and I'll explain just a moment what that means. There's a number, or quite a few folks actually running around saying that the West is being balkanised by mass immigration. That is, large groups of people from all over Africa, Asia, and so on that aren't assimilating, have no intention of assimilating, have no intention of integrating, and are setting up little mini Indias or mini Pakistans or mini Islamic Caliphate republics, that sort of stuff. And thus this will balkanize the West, the once all white Western world, and turn every country, England as an example, into maybe 3 or 4 autonomous zones. The black people here, the Arabic peoples there, and the Indians over the other side, and so on. So now that's certainly a possibility, and I think the globalists have decided that every white country, or once a white country, the white people are not permitted to be in the majority in any place in the world. White people are not allowed to have their own country. This is why they go after Putin and the Hungarian government so aggressively. They want to keep their countries white. Or local, indigenous, native. It doesn't, if they were different colour, it doesn't matter. They just want to keep it indigenous, native, and that's fine. But this goes against the globalist program, and the globalists have decided that in no place in the world are white people allowed to be in the majority, and the globalists are aggressively going about that to import as many black and brown people into the West, so that whites will be an absolute majority. And that the number of Indians in England or Britain or in Australia will be approximately the same, if not greater in number, to the number of whites that are in the country. And this is clearly and absolutely and without doubt policy, and they're pursuing it with much aggression and much determination. That's why they're terrified of Trump, because Trump will overturn a lot of that, and they can't allow that to happen. So, their choices at the moment are to rig the election or to assassinate him. Those are the only 2 options they've got left. And if assassination is too difficult, then they'll do the other. So the Republican National Committee in the US needs to be focused very much, absolutely laser focused on election integrity. Anyway, coming back to balkanization, there's a bit of a history to sort of balkanization. Now, the Balkans is the area, which includes Greece, I guess, but the area around sort of Serbia, Croatia, Macedon, Albania, Montenegro, around that area there. But probably, you could even say it includes Romania and Bulgaria to a lesser extent, but that's the wider area of the Balkans. And the Balkans has been a hotbed of drama and discontent for a long time. And some people think it only happened recently, or when Yugoslavia broke up or something like that. That's not the case. The Roman emperors used to despair and wring their hands all the time about the constant dramas in that part of the world and the constant need to dispatch Roman armies. Now, this was a big deal for in the BC years, and more so, I guess, during the times of the emperors and going into the times of Trajan and Hadrian and so on. But that area of the world, today, as we call it, the Balkans, was always a drama and a flashpoint, with the tribes there completely unable to get on and in a constant state of warfare and friction and so on. Now, it's also a very poor area, because when you're living in such constant insecurity and doubt and uncertainty, you don't invest in the future. You don't invest in good, solid economic infrastructure and productive businesses and productive farms. You just don't do that so much, because why? You could get invaded tomorrow. The bandits from down the road could come and steal all your your cows or your chickens or something like that. So there's very little investment, so that the area and the region stays permanently poor. They just don't develop the wealth creating infrastructure to pull out of being. So even today, there's a guy I know who emigrated from Croatia when he was a kid. I think he was 2 years old or something when he came down, and he goes back there every few years to visit sort of wider family, cousins, and all that sort of thing. And he says as soon as you get out of the cities, it's the countryside is the same. There's no farm machinery. Everyone still uses donkeys and oxen, that sort of thing. And a lot of people don't have motor vehicles. They're still using horse and carts if you get a little bit further out. So they're living the same existence as they would have done pre-industrial revolution. In fact, pre the mercantile age even. So they're 500-600 years living in the past, and they're in Europe, for goodness sakes. But anyway, now the second sort of Balkanization area, and was a flashpoint thousands of years ago and still is today, is the Middle East, around what today is Palestine and Gaza and Israel and so on. That area around there, the western end of Jordan and so on. So even in biblical times, so we're talking 2,000-3,000 years ago, it was a drama. But particularly where there are good records, was at the time of the Roman emperors. So from the time of sort of 70, 80 BC, even around, or even earlier than that, the Romans were constantly again fussing and wringing their hands over what was the endless dramas in that area. This tribe trying to kill that tribe. Then there was the Jewish tribe and sub-Jewish tribes, the assassins, all running around trying to stab and kill each other, and it was an endless drama. And it's a flashpoint for constant dramas 2,000 years and longer ago. Still is today. Nothing's changed. If you looked at the dispatches from the Roman governors from the Balkans, around Croatia and Serbia and so on, if you looked at those dispatches back to the Senate and the emperors in Rome, about what was going on and the difficulties and how the tribes are constantly quarreling and so on, you could write that today. It's just as pertinent today as it was 2,000. Just as pertinent today as it was 2,000 years ago, and the same goes for the Middle East. So it's pretty obvious that if you just want to look at that multiculturalism has got. You struggle to find anywhere in the world where it works or functions where the populations are indigenous. If any of the populations are indigenous there, if you take the populations from other parts of the world, then put them into a place where none of them are indigenous to, then it can possibly work. And there are certainly examples with, say Australia and so on, where that works passably well. But where you have a population or populations that consider themselves indigenous to the area, then it's very difficult for them to get on when they're side by side with very different views and attitudes. Now, just to add complication to the whole thing, the Ottoman Turks conquered most of the Balkans and were there for quite a while, a few hundred years, and they converted quite a few people to Islam. So not only are the old tribal, racial, stuff still going on in the Balkans in Europe, but you've now got the added thing of the Christians and different flavors of Christianity, the Islamic, the Muslims and so on. So that just adds another dimension to the possibilities of conflict. Now coming to the mass migration in across every white country. Again, the globalists are absolutely laser focused on making sure that there is not a single place in the world where whites are in the majority. That is one of their number one concerns at the moment. They're certainly succeeding at it. If you look at Australia and Britain and all that, you look at 90% of the migrants are all black and brown. Or in Australia, more brown and Asian than so the rate of, and then they have much more. They procreate far more aggressively than white people do, and as white people see the future as being less and less hopeful, then they in turn have less children, and on it goes. Now, already I think we need to maybe come up with some new definitions for balkanisation. It's not simply a case of people moving into racially homogenous little subgroups within an overall group and thus forming, if you like, a sub-nation or a splinter nation, or call it what you like. Now, there are whole swathes of Sydney where Indians seem to own every house. I mean, if you see the odd one or two white person, that's it, and they're old. There's no young white people there. It's wall-to-wall Indians. Now, how do they achieve that? How do they get all those white people to all agree to sell their homes quickly and in a short space of time to these Indians? How does that actually happen? I mean, there are definitely, when too many Indians move into an area, some people may want to move out and so on. I understand that, but how do they achieve that? There were, there's we got some friends in one of those suburbs, and when we went to see them for the first time, I think in about 2008, I think it was, to maybe a little bit earlier than that, but around 2005 perhaps. We went to see them, and you see the odd one or two Indians around, but you wouldn't see very many. And the last time we went to see them, which was a year and a half ago, I suppose. No, it would have been less than that, about a year ago. We went to see them, and there was nothing but Indians there. Any direction you looked at, the neighbours next to the other neighbours, I didn't see other than them. I didn't see a single white face. And you go to the local shop, as in the shopping centre, then again you hardly saw any white people. It was all Indian. So the Indians can take over entire suburbs, and they want their own schools, they want their own members of parliament, they want their own special shops, they want to walk around in Indian national dress all day. So they create an India. You walk down the street and all you can see is Indian gods and effigies. You smell Indian cooking, Indian incense sticks burning. That's all you smell going down the road. Even the shopping centre smells like that, for goodness sakes. So, and the amount of shops in there that are Indian, nearly everything seems to be Indian there. Anything that's a franchise or deals in cash, it's all Indian. Everything, shops where you wouldn't see one Indian shop, now it's all Indian shop. The telecoms shops, the mobile phone shops, everything is Indian. You said, wow, that's happened really quickly. So that happened in less than 12 years or so. It went from being hardly any Indians to being an entire suburb of Indian people. So they've got, there are parts of Western Sydney again where you just won't see a white face. It's just wall-to-wall Indian. Now, again, they only want to spend money amongst their own diaspora. They only want to marry their own diaspora, intermarry. They'll send for brides and husbands from the village of their ancestors. They only want their daughters to date and sons to date other Indian. I mean, it's a talk about an inbred group. I mean, this is it. Now they're happy to take the money from the white people. That they're happy to do, and they'll integrate only as far as is required to take that money and to get the handouts, to get the freebies, to get the special benefits. But that's it. It stops right there. They tolerate white people otherwise, and even then, barely. When they socialise, when they only want to hang around with other Indian people. Their cuisine is Indian, and so on and so on. So now the same goes for not perhaps to the same extent, but the same goes for the Chinese communities or any of the other Asian. The Philippine communities, probably the only one where they've got a relatively higher rate of integration. So you've got entire suburbs that are Chinese, for example. And then you get the sublots like the Hong Kong Chinese here, mainland Chinese there, Taiwanese Chinese somewhere else, and so on. And they don't intermingle too much. So this balkanisation in the sense of racial groups and entire suburbs where they just hang out, because that's all they do, they create their ghettos. That's balkanisation. But I think the greater or the initial balkanisation is that you lose confidence and faith in your own society. And here the globalists have been hard at work undermining Western societies. You see, in Washington, D.C. A couple of days ago, mobs running around burning the American flag and defacing American monuments, then pulling American flags down off flagpoles and putting the ISIS flag or the Palestinian flag up on there, and the authorities do nothing. They just stand there and watch. I think 2 or 3 people got arrested given the government. Can you imagine what they do if that was a white people were protesting or doing that sort of thing? The police would be out in force. The batons and the truncheons would be swinging. There'd be mass arrests. There'd be front page news around the world. That march in Chancellorsville, where the FBI had their planted Nazi flag guy there just to gin and juice it all up and to provoke confrontation. That today is still being waved around. There you go, proves white national Nazis and so. whereas brown people can do infinitely worse things, and nothing gets said. In fact, it's swept under the car. There's been nothing mentioned in the press in Australia at all about that stuff in Washington DC. But if white guy grabs the ass for black chick somewhere, front page news, international, it's insane. Now, so the Balkanisation has occurred already in a cultural sense and in a self-confidence sense to attack the social cohesion of the country and of the people and of the society. So that's I think a step in Balkanisation. Otherwise, the white people would never have allowed it. So now the next level of Balkanisation is if you look at the people that are fully supporting mass migration, then they pretty much all tend to be either direct beneficiaries of it, or people who are too stupid, like college kids or something, or they live in well-to-do areas. And the primary shaker movers of it, of course, live in the well-to-do areas. Now, we know quite a lot of people that are well-to-do. They've got their $6 million house here and their $4 million house there and their $3.5 million house down the other way. This sort of thing. So they've got their 2 million cabin in the mountains and so on. So when we have lunch or barbecue or dinner, something with them, then those people are very much on board with not simply mass migration, but all the globalist talking points. The global warming is going to end us, and they're pretty much on board with all of it. We've got to do LGBTQ because they're a marginalised group and so on, but they're not affected by any of it, not even slightly. So now the entry level, and I'll use house prices as the example. The entry level for house prices for, if you like, the folks that live in the quiet, clean, tree-lined streets that are not necessarily 100% white. They're saying 95% plus white. There's just a sprinkling of a few very rich Chinese and rich Brahmins amongst the group, but not very many. And they're very quiet and well behaved and keep to themselves and so on. So these people, say in Australia at least, say between 3 and 3.5 million gets you the entry level into those sort of suburbs. So if you want to buy a house in those suburbs, $3 to $3.5 million bucks. That's entry level, and once you're at that level, and then the ones going more expensive than that into the 5 million, 10 million more, then they are all in favour of mass migration. It's a wonderful thing, but they don't have any. They're not affected by it. None of these rabble, this third world rabble, live anywhere near them. And the only time they ever get to interact with any of these people is when they come around to mow their lawn or clean their swimming pool or something like that. Or they may see them as retail, shop workers in the local shopping centre. They may see them there. But other than that, and when you go to the local shopping centre in those places, again, other than the retail workers that come in from far away, you don't. It's all white people. You don't see any people there. I mean, English is the only language spoken. You don't hear any other language spoken in there. So it's a very different world. Now, if they went to a shopping centre where English just wasn't spoken, you couldn't hear it anywhere, and where the shop workers can barely speak a word of English, and so on. So these people would start to have different ideas and different attitudes, but they don't. So they look at they live in little bubbles and little cocoons in their pretty much all white area. And if they do have non-white people coming to their barbecues or something like that, then those non-white people are rich, well-behaved people from China or India or wherever, and they're only you don't put up with it for very long. They're only there for a few hours. So this is where we've got an economic balkanization. Now you could say that always existed, but not to the extent where the people who live in those wealthier suburbs seem to have close to visceral hatred for their fellow citizens, but also they've got an attitude of shrugging. So, for example, they were talking about, we're having a conversation about how enriching mass migration was, and I pointed out that in the news there'd been quite a few stabbing murders in some of those culturally and racially enriched areas, and number of people have died and this sort of stuff. And I was surprised they treated it with something like a shoulder shrug. Oh, well, it's nowhere near me. It doesn't affect me. Why should I care? And aren't you concerned that one day these people are going to come for you and say, oh, no, that's never going to happen. If they want to come here, they have to be rich. In order to get rich, they have to toe the line and if and so on. So they are already balkanizing the society in their own minds. So when the wealthiest best connected string puller type people, whether they be judges or captains of industry or whatever, they're able to look at what's happening with either a shoulder shrug or approval, because it's not affecting them. So I see balkanization happening, vertically and horizontally, if not three-dimensionally. There is the racial aspect, but it will involve the complete loss of confidence and breakdown in central government, and where central government ceases to exist, it'll just be where an offshore managerial financial elite, an equivalent of some sort of United Nations type thing or whatever, they will be the government, just the administrators. The idea of voting for your government and these sort of that'll be gone. Maybe some local voting at the street level type thing. Maybe that will still be allowed, but nothing that I don't think national governments will exist. So balkanization will occur within a structure of an economic region, and so we're going to see that sort of level of managerial control will exist purely for the purpose of promoting balkanization and removing national governments. So once you don't have a national government or representative government, or even laws for that matter that are applied equally, and we're seeing that being different now. So the laws are applied very harshly to white people, but they're very soft and go easy on the brown people or the Islamic people and so on. We saw this in Britain recently. It looks like a police officer who was fighting and struggling with difficult Islamic activists is going to be thrown under the bus, and the police and the government just roll over and give the Islamic mob whatever it is they want or demand. But if white people did the same thing, they'd be derided as Nazis and they'd all be thrown in prison. So it gives you an idea. So the balkanization will come from different laws being applied to different groups. If you look at it, if you look at the whole structure of globalization, the first and foremost thing is white people, particularly white men, must be controlled. We must control them. The others, doesn't really matter so much. But white people, white men, we must control, and that's also a part of their program to balkanize the West. So I think it's inevitable, but I think it's forced on us. It can be turned around, it can be stopped, but based on current trends and trajectories, it won't. Now, I've put a link into a YouTuber who's talked about this a little bit, called Richard IV. If you haven't seen his videos, I'd suggest they're worth looking at. And I've put a link to one of his more recent videos in the description below. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback Channel, and thank you for listening.